Ever wanted to learn how to build a flying car? Well, here's your chance. Udacity, an e-learning school in Silicon Valley, started accepting applications to study flying car engineering January 23rd. It was set up by Sebastian Thrun, who previously headed up Google's self-driving car project Waymo, and he thinks it will attract at least 10,000 applicants. Over a 6-month period, students will study a new flying car curriculum, as well as courses in aerial robotics and intelligent air systems. This isn't the first time Thrun has thought outside the box. In 2016, he offered a self-driving car program at Udacity, and that attracted 50,000 applicants. Thrun admitted to news sources flying cars, quote, feels like science fiction now, but he went on to say, quote, in a few years' time, this will be the hottest topic on the planet. For United News International, I'm Rachel Latham. The European Union's top court decided immigration forces cannot use sexual orientation tests to decide the acceptance of asylum seekers' applications. Officials in Hungary put a Nigerian man through psychological tests to determine if he was gay before they decided if he could be granted asylum. The man, not named in the case, originally put his claim in 2015. He said he faced persecution for being a gay man living in Nigeria, where homosexual activity is criminalized. Authorities denied his application because the psychologist said he was not gay based on his answers in the test. The court ruled January 25th his case must be reconsidered and stated it was an invasion of, quote, the most intimate aspects of life. It also said immigration officials can seek experts' opinion on whether or not to accept an asylum application, but it must be in line with human rights. For United News International, I'm Rachel Latham.
The capital of Japan is experiencing a historic cold snap. Japan's meteorological agency said temperatures dropped as low as -4 degrees Celsius in central Tokyo Thursday morning, January 25th. Local news reported the figure is the lowest on record since January 1970. A deputy government spokesperson said the chill prompted a low temperature warning for the first time in over 3 decades. The icy cold is expected to stretch into the weekend, with lows of -4 degrees Celsius expected Saturday and -1 degree Sunday. The worst snowstorm in 4 years also struck Tokyo earlier this week, disrupting train and airline schedules and causing traffic accidents. The city's fire department said it responded to over 2,800 calls on Wednesday, the most ever received in one day since the service started in 1936. City officials advised residents to protect pipes that may freeze, choking access to water. For United News International, I'm Kimberly Caldwell.
The floods in the French capital Paris are getting all the headlines, but the rising waters in France's second city, Lyon, are also causing concern. The Saône and Rhône rivers meet in the city and have broken their banks in the past, most recently in 2003, when the road by the Saône was cut and homes flooded just north of the city. I spent all my childhood on the riverside and I rarely saw floods like this. It's pretty impressive. For the Saône, it's been years since we saw it in flood. In general, every winter it's in flood, but the situation's exceptional this year for the Rhône because it's not often in flood. The meeting of the two rivers, the confluence, is catastrophic. The lower levels of public car parks closest to the river banks were evacuated and closed, exacerbating the already difficult parking in the city. Some private garages were preparing to pump out water if needed. The car parks are completely flooded and you feel the lack of spaces in the city centre. For some, however, it's a chance to mess about on a river flowing with unusual force. And the city's rowers and kayakers are loving it. The recent bad weather's considerably raised the level of Lyon's rivers. The banks of the Rhône have been flooded and partly closed. This is the first time since their development in 2007. The level of the Saône remains high, with the peak expected for this weekend. The Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region remains on alert even if the weather forecasts announce better weather on Saturday and Sunday.
À Lyon, Raphaël Tavernier, Euronews.
The alert on Mayon volcano was raised to level 4 as it continued to display intense sporadic lava fountaining.
Behind me, you can see Mount Mayon spewing lava. According to volcanologists, these frequent explosions signify that Mayon volcano is at the peak of a major and very dangerous eruption.
Mayona can't help but cry over her family's situation. Ironically, she was named after the famous tourist attraction, but it's now made her life miserable. A single mom of 6 children, she recalls the night when she and her children were forced to run to safety. She said, "I was really frightened at the rumbling sound that the volcano made. It sounded very loud, like the engine of a big truck." Although her house is inside the 8-kilometer danger zone, Mayona remained in her house. When her children started crying, she decided to take them to the evacuation center. This school is now an evacuation center. Mayona and her children share a classroom with 12 other families. They are among the more than 60,000 residents who were forced to leave their homes because of the imminent danger posed by Mayon volcano. Most of them, like Mayona, fled with just meager belongings and no money to buy food. They were very happy and thankful that CBN Humanitarian came to give them rice, eggs, and other food items. And more than the physical food, Mayona received spiritual nourishment as a CBN Humanitarian Church partner told her about the good news of salvation through Christ and prayed for her. Her face lit up and she said, "My faith has just been strengthened because I know that whatever happens, I am now certain that God will never leave me." The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology says 2 to 3 months may pass before Mayon volcano is peaceful again. In these trying times, CBN Humanitarian is committed to help. Lucille Telusan, CBN News, Albay, Philippines.
People believe North Korea is so deadly and dangerous for Christians and other religious believers because it's godless. But actually, the opposite is true. Kim Jong-un is worshipped as a god, and an entire religion is built around idolizing the Kim dynasty.
Suzanne Schulte and Tom Belke recently testified on Capitol Hill about the Juche religion that was clamped on the Hermit Kingdom by Kim Jong-un's grandfather.
He set himself up as God. His son up, Kim Jong-il, is the Jesus figure, and Juche, their philosophy, as the Holy Spirit.
It's why Schulte believes North Korea suffers so much evil.
That whole construct of how that regime is established is a perversion of the Christian gospel message.
Belke has written Juche, a Christian study of North Korea's state religion.
Americans and people that are outside of North Korea do not understand how North Koreans think if they don't understand Juche religion and how it's been brainwashed.
And they are brainwashed to idolize him through their entire lives. And they in fact have a prayer they say, "Thank you, Father Kim Il-sung," after a meal. They have what we would know as the Apostles' Creed that's changed to worship the Kim dictatorship.
North Korea thinks America is so dangerous it keeps threatening to nuke the U.S. But Belke insists the regime actually is more afraid of the power of the gospel than it is of the American superpower.
The Bible and the Christian gospel is the most destabilizing thing to the North Korean regime.
Schulte says the creator of Juche, who later defected, told her
it was only the gospel message that could break free the stranglehold over the people of North Korea with the brainwashing of this system that they're suffering under.
Because it undermines Kim's supposed godlike authority.
The Bible teaches that there is a supreme sovereign God over all men, including the dictator.
Belke thinks President Trump's name-calling, like labeling the dictator Little Rocket Man, has a similar and significant impact.
I think it should be intensified because what he's essentially doing It's both counterintuitive and brilliant. He's actually mocking their God.
Schulte thinks North Koreans, if given the chance, would easily pick Christianity's message over Kim's Juche.
You are a beloved child of God and created to be free, and they teach you are a slave of the Kim family and you need to devote your entire lives and sacrifice and die for the Kim family.
Schulte is backing Free North Korea Radio as one way to broadcast the gospel into the Hermit Kingdom at least 1 hour a day. She's heard it's led to miracles, like in one suffering town.
All the children were dying from typhoid fever. This one woman who listened to the Free North Korea Radio broadcast wrote down the Bible verses, and she said, I'm going to pray these over my daughter. And if it's true, if God's real, then my daughter will be healed. And her daughter was the only one that survived that epidemic.
Belke believes it's power like that, not nukes and missiles, that'll win a victory over the Kim's evil.
These spiritual powers and principalities that control that undergird the North Korean regime have to be broken. That's not going to happen simply by normal policies. That has to happen by prayer and fasting, and that's the work of the church.
Schulte would start by calling for a worldwide day of fasting and prayer.
I believe we should do it April 28th, which is the anniversary of the first North Korea Freedom Day.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
A German judge has caused outrage at a trial in Bavaria for removing a crucifix from his courtroom at the request of an asylum seeker. The Afghan man is suspected of threatening to kill a fellow countryman for converting to Christianity. Peter Oliver has more details.
This judge in the Bavarian Alps has found himself in the eye of a storm. That's after he ordered that a crucifix be removed from his courtroom during the trial of an Afghan asylum applicant accused of trying to kill another Afghan who converted to Christianity. It's a move that's caused furore in the strongly Catholic state as well as in German tabloid media. The judge says he made the move in order to show religious tolerance.
How can I educate the defendant to move away from his beliefs? He thinks jihad exists between Christians and Islamists, and so I did not think it wise to condemn him under the cross.
I do not care if there is a cross or not. When the judge addressed this issue in court, I did not really understand the problem.
Bosses in the Bavarian Ministry of Justice say this should never have been an issue in the first place.
The presence of crosses in courtrooms does not prevent the state from upholding religious and ideological neutrality.
Religious rights for Christian converts in Germany is a hot issue, particularly in places like Maisbach. The town on the border with Austria is where many refugees and migrants either arrived or at least passed through in 2015. And the move by Judge Schmidt has prompted ferocious backlash on social media.
Dear Bavarian people, this is a slap in the face of all Christians. Do you still want to trample on your Christian values?
There are judges who leave me at a loss for words. Such an irony. In the trial of Afghan Islamists, Judge Klaus-Jürgen Schmidt takes crucifix from the wall of the courtroom.
The sophisticated Islamization in this country continues. Judge Klaus-Jürgen Schmidt, are you insane? Such a disgrace.
This story comes as the trial of a different failed asylum applicant from Afghanistan is underway in a nearby town in southern Germany. In that case, a 38-year-old woman was brutally stabbed to death in front of her small children. The prosecution say that the motive behind the killing was that she had converted to Christianity. That trial is expected to continue for several more days.
Before Air Force Two ever sit down in the Middle East, the Vice President talked with CBN's David Brody about the reason for his trip.
If the world knows nothing else, the world should know this. Under President Donald Trump, America stands with Israel. And we'll be delivering that strong message. It was 70 years ago that the nation of Israel, in a miracle of history, came back into existence in its ancient homeland, and every day Americans have cherished that accomplishment, and we'll be there to celebrate that.
And celebrate he did, earning high praise from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This is the first time that I stand here where both leaders can say those three words, Israel's capital, Jerusalem.
Pence became the first U.S. vice president ever to be invited to address the Knesset. He kept his cool when Israeli Arab demonstrators protested the U.S. policy change toward Jerusalem.
It is deeply humbling for me to stand before this vibrant democracy.
He shared his heart, along with his reverence for the scriptures pertaining to Israel, and firmly restated the new U.S. policy.
Jerusalem is Israel's capital. And as such, President Trump has directed the State Department to immediately begin preparations to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin called the vice president a mensch, a very high compliment in Yiddish, meaning a person of integrity. Emotional visits to Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust memorial, and his prayers at the Western Wall sealed a visit like few others in the history of American diplomacy.
And the reason is that this administration is putting its embassy where its mouth is. For years and years, U.S. presidents and vice presidents, secretaries of state have all said, given lip service to Jerusalem as being the capital of Israel, but we never put it into practice. And this administration is saying that it will put it into practice. This has the potential to be the most significant visit by a vice president to any nation in recent U.S. history.
Pence also promised change is coming to the U.S.-signed nuclear deal with Iran. That will put Washington on a collision course with European allies who are doing big business with Iran. And with boycotts and curses, Palestinian leaders have set a hostile course against Washington on the international stage. But the coming debate will show the U.S. and Israel largely united over the city King David made his capital.
Yes, we have a proposal for peace. It's a great proposal for the Palestinians. I think it's a very good proposal for Israel. It covers a lot of the things that were over the years discussed and agreed on. But the fact is, and I think you know this better than anybody, there were never any deals that came close because Jerusalem, you could never get past Jerusalem. So when people said, oh, I set it back, I didn't set it back, I helped it. Because by taking it off the table, that was the toughest issue. And Israel will pay for that. Look, Israel, something's going to happen. They'll do something that's going to be a very good thing. But they want to make peace, and I hope the Palestinians want to make peace. And if they do, everybody's going to be very happy in the end. We'll see what happens, Steve. And I spoke to some of the people involved, and I said, did you ever talk about the vast amounts of funds, money, that we give to the Palestinians? We give, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they said, we never talked. Well, we do talk about it. And when they disrespected us a week ago by not allowing our great vice president to see them, and we give them hundreds of millions of dollars in aid and support, tremendous numbers that nobody understands. That money is on the table, and that money is not going to them unless they sit down and negotiate peace.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm ready for peace. I explained that. I explained that to President Trump. I reaffirmed my willingness and Israel's willingness to engage in an effort to achieve peace with the Palestinians, an effort that is being advanced by his very able team. We are interested in pursuing that. Thank you. Thank you.
Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
It's been about 5 years since major news outlets started hyping each and every supermoon, so it's understandable if you've stopped paying attention. Still, the one Wednesday, January 31st, may be worth your while. A supermoon is simply when the moon is full, while it's also closest to Earth. Technically, it's the biggest and brightest the moon can look, but it's hard to notice that difference with the naked eye. But this one will also happen during a total lunar eclipse, when the moon passes through Earth's shadow. The shadow turns the moon a rusty red color, which is usually nicknamed a blood moon, making this a super blood moon. This will also be the second full moon in the same month, aka a blue moon. So what you'll see Wednesday is a super blue blood moon, the first in 150 years. Here's the bad news. You'll have to get up early Wednesday to see it. The best views are all around sunrise or earlier. NASA has a list of ideal viewing times for each time zone.
Playing for time in Calais' industrial zone, a place where asylum seekers have flocked to in the hope they may escape the limbo they face day in, day out. While they are here, they are trapped. Many of them have been here for months, sleeping rough wherever they can.
We are sleeping without any food. I mean, in the road maybe.
Yeah.
Because it's right, yeah. Because it's just, the police is disturbs us. Yeah, this is not life. It's not life. Because living in the forest is we have human beings.
So this is the place, the location where one of the food distribution points was supposed to occur on Thursday afternoon. As you can see, authorities are there and they've stopped it from happening, and that's incurred a lot of anger from those who've gathered here to be able to get some food.
For months, the riot police have been a regular presence here, as are the standoffs with migrants desperate to escape. Some hope, perhaps, has been provided by the joint treaty signed by the French President and the British Prime Minister last week.
A particular important point of this Sandhurst Treaty will be the subject of unaccompanied minors. This treaty will allow us, for all those in a position to cross the Channel, to drastically reduce the time limits from 6 months to 30 days for adults and from 6 months to 25 days for unaccompanied minors.
The treaty is intended to improve the management of the border on both sides of the English Channel, but there is little evidence as to how it will be done and whether it would expedite urgent asylum cases to reunite them with relatives living in the UK. For those working on the front line of this crisis, the expectations have led to rumours that asylum seekers only need come to Calais to get to the UK, and that's led to larger numbers of people turning up here.
I do feel people have false hope because of this misunderstanding and because there's been no effort to explain any of the changes. There's been no effort beforehand to explain to people what asylum entails in France.
Despite the challenges, the young, the desperate try to find any way they can to reach Britain, no matter how dangerous. The police attempt to stop them climbing onto lorries bound for England, but they still take the chance. Any risk they feel is worth it to leave behind a life in France that hangs in the balance. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, Calais.
David Costa's been sleeping on the streets of London for more than a year. It's a bleak existence.
It's not easy, it's really hard. It's you gotta deal with the cold, you gotta deal with people, you know, that aren't nice sometimes, you know.
He lost his job as a carpenter and couldn't afford to pay for housing. He's now worried about his mental health.
I just want accommodation, a roof over my head, and maybe get you know, see a doctor to get my head back together and go back to work, you know.
In one of the wealthiest countries in the world, more and more people are now living on the streets. Many are struggling with addiction, mental or physical illness. Others are escaping violence and abuse. But an increasing number are here simply because they can't afford to live anywhere. The situation's made worse by a critical shortage of affordable housing and cuts to social welfare benefits. According to the government's latest figures, there are more than 4,500 people sleeping rough on England's streets. But the scourge of homelessness doesn't end here. Hidden away in bedsits and temporary emergency accommodation are thousands more homeless people of all ages.
The entire homeless population of Great Britain is around about 250,000 people. Rough sleeping is the most visible and I have to say the most outrageous form of homelessness in terms of it being absolutely unacceptable The average age of death is just 47 years old. You're 17 times more likely to be attacked on the street than anybody else.
The government says it's committed to halving rough sleeping in 4 years and eliminating it altogether in a decade. But this is not an isolated story. Homelessness is on the rise in every European country except Finland. In the Greek capital Athens, as many as 1 in 70 residents are homeless. And in Paris, the number of people sleeping rough has reached critical levels. In Finland, when a person becomes homeless, they're given stable accommodation first, rather than slowly progressing through levels of temporary housing. The British government's planning to trial a similar scheme in the UK, but those forced to sleep rough need real change now. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, London.
Oniva Bridget has 5 children, and in a month she's expecting another one. But she's been forced to flee her home in southern Cameroon with her family to escape a military crackdown. They had to walk for a day to cross the border into Nigeria.
Our people started fighting, so I run with my children. Now as I run with my children like this, I'm suffering. No place for me to sleep, no clothes for me to wear. And now I'm pregnant, so there's no clothes. When I will deliver the pikin and I will wear the clothes, so I have nothing.
Oniva and her children are among about 7,000 English-speaking Cameroonians in this camp in Benue. English speakers like her make up less than a fifth of their country's 23 million people. They say they have been marginalized by the French-speaking majority and demanded independence, but they didn't get what they asked for.
Our problem of Anglophone started on that 1st of October when we hosted our flag, the Amazonian flag. The government of Cameroon was not free, was not happy with this declaration of our independence. So he ordered his military. They got youths were beaten, some were even shot to death, some were injured, wounded. And then on that 1st October, there was no peace in our community.
Local officials say there could now be more than 40,000 Cameroonian refugees in Nigeria. Camps like these are growing here and supplies are running out.
Most people here are yet to have breakfast. They're not even sure of supper. When they left their homes, they were only concerned about their safety.
Over 10,000, that is a big number already for Benue State government to be feeding alone. Do you understand? So there is that challenge of food. We have been giving food, but that is not enough. And then there is a challenge of water. So there is need for potable water. Need for that water to be treated before they drink. And then the challenge of shelter. At the moment, we have kept them in a school. The schools are resumed.
The refugees present here have strained relations between Nigeria and Cameroon. Cameroonian military officials accuse Nigeria of sheltering insurgents. They say they want to establish an independent homeland for Cameroon's English-speaking minority. But the refugees here say what they want is enough food and water and peace. Wendy Abo, TRT World, Benue, Nigeria.
This is the only source of drinking water in the Delmas neighbourhood of Port-au-Prince. A 20-litre bucket of water costs 16 cents. Marley Blanchard is one of few Haitians who can afford the daily ritual.
We'd like to get drinking water. We'd like them to build a tank so we can get water because water's life. Without it, we can't live. We need the state to build a bathroom. There's no bathroom here.
But those who cannot afford the 16 cents for clean water come here. The water is contaminated, but they fill up their containers and drink it anyway, despite the threat from waterborne cholera. More than 500,000 Haitians have had the disease.
We need water. If the people don't have water, what will we do? This tank doesn't work. Water is health. Water is life. There are people who don't have that. When this tank worked, we had water.
It all flows back to this. Haiti's devastating earthquake in 2010. 220,000 people died and infrastructure was destroyed. International aid agencies flew in to build temporary infrastructure, including water tanks. 8 years on, they're breaking down as the wait to rebuild infrastructure drags on. Less than half of Haitians in rural areas have access to clean water, and only a quarter have a toilet.
I'm waiting for the international community and for non-profit organizations to help us. Only they can make something for us.
But the international community has been distracted by other disasters. The UN mission has pulled out and aid has dried up. Yet Haiti remains one of the poorest nations in the world. Charlotte Ballas, Al Jazeera.
About 30 Somalia and Ethiopian refugees drowned off the coast of southern Yemen. The United Nations Refugee and Migration Agencies announced January 26th their boat capsized and gunfire was used on its passengers. They also said the boat was believed to be operated by smugglers who tried to take the group to the country of Djibouti in Africa while trying to extort money from them. The agency said they were working with the Yemeni Coast Guard to find out what exactly happened and that they were, quote, outraged by the deaths. Last year, many migrants from Somalia and Ethiopia died after human traffickers forced them on overcrowded boats headed to Yemen. The country is in an ongoing civil war that has displaced many. The World Bank estimates about 60% of Yemen's population is food insecure and about 80% are in need of humanitarian assistance. For United News International, I'm Rachel Labour.
At least 40 people have been killed in Afghanistan and around 150 wounded after a suicide blast in Kabul. Officials say the huge bomb was hidden in an ambulance and exploded in an area near foreign embassies and government buildings. The death toll is expected to rise. The vehicle is reported to have detonated in an area closed to public transport after being driven past a police checkpoint. The Taliban says it was behind the attack. The bombing comes a week after the group killed more than 20 people at a luxury hotel in the Afghan capital.
보시는 바와 같이 오늘 화재는 07시 35분에 세종병원 1층 응급실에서 화재가 최초에 발생한 것으로 저희들이 확인하였습니다. 그리고 1층에서 2층으로 화재가 확산되는 것을 초기에 소방력에 의해서 저지를 했습니다. 그와 같은 관계로 2층, 3층, 4층, 5층으로 화재가 확산되는 것은 저희 소방력에 의해서 저지를 했습니다.
추가적인 피해가 발생하지 않도록 구조된 인원에 대해 필요한 의료 조치를 취하여 추가 사망자 발생을 최소화하도록 만전을 기할 것.
On January 25th, ISIS units attacked positions of the Syrian Arab Army, the SAA, in the villages of Kishma and Garaiba in the province of Deir ez-Zor. According to the ISIS-linked news agency Amaq, ISIS killed several armed soldiers and destroyed 2 battle tanks with anti-tank guided missiles. However, the terrorist group did not overrun the SAA defense and was forced to retreat. According to the Syrian state-run media, 25 ISIS members were killed and several vehicles were destroyed in the clashes. ISIS seeks to seize some area in the Euphrates Valley in order to lift the siege from its members besieged in the Homs Desert. The Turkish Armed Air Force, the TAF, and the Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army, the TFSA, captured 7 members of the Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG, during clashes in the Afrin area, according to Turkish media. In turn, the YPG claimed that it had captured 16 Turkish service members. However, these persons are likely just members of the TFSA. The YPG also said that it has lost 18 members in the clashes so far, while the TAF claims that over 300 YPG members have been killed. Both sides provide contradicting reports about the casualties and the situation in the Afrin area. The propaganda is an important part of the Turkish-Kurdish standoff in Afrin. According to Deputy Chief of General Staff of the TFSA, Haytham Afisi, a 10,000-strong force is already prepared for a military operation against Kurdish forces in the city of Manjib. Afisi said that the Manjib operation will be started after the TFSA and the TAF finish their operation against YPG/YPJ forces in Afrin. Manjib is not the final destination. We won't stop until Hasaka, Ain Issa, Ain al-Arab, Ras al-Ain, al-Malikiya, and Tal Abyad are purged of terror, he said. This statement clearly follows the official rhetoric of the Turkish leadership. President Erdogan and others have repeatedly noted that Manjib may become a target of the Turkish military operation. The Democratic Federation of Northern Syria and Afrin area released an official statement in which it called on the SAA to counter the TAF attack on Afrin and to defend the Syrian border. The statement clearly contradicts previous statements of Kurdish officials and may indicate some shift in the YPG attitude towards the Damascus.
The U.S. Air Force has announced a round of upgrades to the U.S.'s largest non-nuclear bomb, a 30,000-pound bunker buster. On January 24th, the Air Force confirmed that the giant bomb, known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or GBU-57, had just completed its fourth upgrade. According to an Air Force spokeswoman, the modification, quote, has improved the performance against hard and deeply buried targets. At nearly 21 feet long, the GBU-57 was designed to attack reinforced concrete buildings. It can be used to hit nuclear or missile factories hundreds of feet underground. The bunker buster, which is manufactured by Boeing, can only be carried by the B-2 stealth bomber. 3 B-2 bombers were deployed to Guam this month. The Air Force declined to say if the GBU-57 was aboard. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mango.
Ambassador to the United Nations having fundamentally rejected a so-called peace proposal which calls for a new constitution in the war-battered country.
This unofficial paper is rejected every word and sentence, and it is not worth the ink that is printed on, because the Syrian people will not and do not accept solutions which come down on parachutes or on the backs of tanks.
Rashad Jafari criticized the U.S., Britain, France, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia for drawing up such a proposal. He also blamed them for the bloodshed in Syria. Jafari underlined the need for inter-Syria dialogue to resolve the years-long conflict in his country. He made the comments on the second and final day of the 9th round of UN-backed peace talks in the Austrian capital Vienna. Previous rounds of talks failed to yield concrete results.
Well, meanwhile, the UK's Defence Secretary has accused Russia of a plot to damage the British economy and kill thousands of people. Gavin Williamson made those comments in an interview with British newspaper The Daily Telegraph.
What they're looking at doing is they're going to be thinking, how can we just cause so much pain to Britain, damage its economy, rip its infrastructure apart, actually cause thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths, but actually have an element of creating total chaos within the country?
Well, Russia's defence ministry has responded to those claims, saying they belong in a comic book or a Monty Python sketch. Williamson's remarks appeared in the same week the UK's military called for more funding to tackle the alleged Russia threat. There's also been media speculation about possible Russian cyber attacks and even nuclear war, but it's unclear what these claims are actually based on. International affairs commentator Jonathan Steele told us the UK's defence secretary is just scaremongering.
It's absurd to create a scare like this out of absolutely nothing. You have to distinguish between military capabilities and political intentions. Just because Russia has a fleet, an air force, missiles, an army, it doesn't mean that Russia is suddenly going to attack us. It just reveals the fact that, unfortunately, as a result of this increasingly bellicose political atmosphere between NATO countries, Russia is taking extra precautions and testing its own reserves and possibilities. What we need is common sense, we need dialogue, we need engagement, and to discuss the differences that there are between us, rather than assuming because there are differences that somehow the other country is an enemy.
For the first time since the Vietnam War, the U.S. plans to send an aircraft carrier to the Southeast Asian country. On January 25th, during a visit to Hanoi, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis revealed that a U.S. aircraft carrier will make a port visit to Da Nang in March. Da Nang was the landing site for the first American troops to arrive in Vietnam in 1965. Such a visit could bring the largest number of U.S. forces to Vietnam since the conflict ended in 1975. In the years after the conflict, Vietnam and the U.S. have become strong military allies. The visit is likely to anger China, which has been critical of U.S. moves to flex its military muscle in the region. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Now, in other news, South Korea and the United States have wrapped up their latest round of high-level defense talks, while the Koreas are interacting for North Korea's participation in the upcoming Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Seoul and Washington reaffirmed that their ultimate goal is the regime's denuclearization. Oh Jung-hee with the report.
Amid continued visits and talks between the two Koreas, the defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington met on Friday to reaffirm their ironclad alliance and denuclearization goal. South Korean Defense Minister Song Young-moo and U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis sat down for talks at U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii, just 3 months after their last meeting in late October. The U.S. defense chief welcomed the recent resumption of inter-Korean talks, but at the same time, Mattis and his South Korean counterpart confirmed their shared goal of the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. That is, the talks on the Olympics should serve to make North Korea change its path and come to the negotiation table, but not detract from the ultimate goal of denuclearization. Song and Mattis also saw eye to eye on the need to strengthen military readiness against Pyongyang while maintaining strong support for diplomatic solutions.
This threat remains diplomacy-led, backed up with military options available to ensure that our diplomats are understood to be speaking from a position of strength.
Mattis reaffirmed Washington's ironclad security commitment to South Korea, including extended deterrence, and stressed North Korea will face an overwhelming response from the U.S. if the regime ever attacked one of its allies. Song and Mattis also emphasized that any attempt to crack the Seoul-Washington alliance will fail. They agreed to meet face-to-face as often as possible. While there was speculation the talks would set the schedule for the postponed joint military drills Key Resolve and Full Eagle, that was not the case. The exact schedules remain unknown, but the Allies' military authorities are firm that the drills will be held as normal immediately after the Pyeongchang Olympics wrap up in March. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Atomic scientists and policy experts warn the world is at its closest to a nuclear war since 1953. One America's Christian Rose explores the eerie side of rising nuclear tensions.
It's 2 minutes to midnight for the first time in 65 years as the world is bracing for a nuclear annihilation. A panel of nuclear experts and policy analysts calling back to the Manhattan Project and known as the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists say global leaders have failed to address the looming threat of the spread of nuclear weapons over the past few years, bringing the man-made apocalypse ever closer. Subsequently, the scientists moved the main arm of the doomsday clock 30 seconds closer to midnight, which symbolically means the end of human civilization.
I want to emphasize the historical significance of today. The doomsday clock is closer to midnight than it's ever been in the lifetime of almost everyone in this room.
The bulletin cites North Korea's nuclear progress and the war of words between Pyongyang and Washington as the main development of the past year, moving the pendulum of doom. The scientists say a probability of an accidental nuclear launch or an incident related to weapons of mass destruction is now higher due to rising global tensions. Last time the world was at 2 minutes to midnight was back in 1953, following the test of thermonuclear devices in the US and the Soviet Union, complicated by an internal political struggle in the Bolshevik Empire, following the death of Joseph Stalin in March of that year.
To call the world's nuclear situation dire is to understate the danger and its immediacy. We considered the ossified state of arms control negotiations and non-proliferation agreements, as well as new testing undertaken by North Korea, nuclear exercises built into Russia's military plans, and an enhanced commitment to nuclear weapons in Pakistan, India, and China.
Those scientists also say a longer-term threat to global security is the ongoing tensions between Russia and the US, which started back in 2014 following the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, sparking the first major war in Europe since 1945. Among other factors bringing humankind closer to midnight, the bulletin is citing territorial disputes in the South China Sea, which involves Communist China and US regional allies. Additionally, the atomic scientists say a decline in global diplomacy is a factor contributing to many nations' growing confidence a nuclear option could be an ultimate solution after all.
For the first time in many years, in fact, no U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control negotiations are underway. And if the draft U.S. nuclear posture review is any guide to U.S. policy, there will be no U.S.-Russian nuclear arms control negotiations for the foreseeable future. Instead, we could see a return to a nuclear arms race.
At the Cold War's most recent peak back in 1984, the doomsday clock stood at 3 minutes to midnight, despite a year prior the US and Soviet Union narrowly avoided a mutual exchange of nuclear strikes. This was made possible due to a radar glitch in the USSR, as well as a NATO exercise, Able Archer 83, and the Soviet downing of a South Korean passenger jet in the Far East. They suggest there is little chance to rewind the clock anytime soon, as the Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine continues. North Korea and Iran are adamant to move forward their nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and the advancement and global trade of mass destruction technology gains momentum.
The danger of nuclear conflagration is not the only reason the clock has been moved forward, as my colleagues have described. This danger looms at a time when there's been a loss of trust in political institutions, in the media, in science, and in facts themselves.
These factors point to a highly volatile state of international affairs, as the looming threat of a nuclear holocaust suggests the time of globalist world order may be running short. Christian Rose, One American News.
A touching embrace, not a moment too soon.
I wish I had done it years and years ago.
This is the moment Logan Borden surprised his stepdad with adoption papers.
Wait, I was nervous. My stomach was in knots.
Logan has been raised by Rick Morse since he was a baby. Logan says they're best friends.
He's everything to me. He's somebody I go to for anything ever, whether it's bad in my life or good in my life. He doesn't treat me different.
Now that's the true meaning of being a father.